Something that has been debated for a long time is what is the correct status in terms of employment of UFC fighters? Should they continue to be independent contractors or should they actually be moved in as employees? Now, obviously, when you're an employee, and this varies from state to state, they're not universal codes that are applied across the United States. It's different in California, it's different in Nevada, etc. But typically, when you are an employee of a particular company versus an independent contractor, there are restrictions that come with that, but there are also benefits, namely health insurance, etc. So people have gone back and forth on this debate. I don't know if more people feel that UFC fighters are incorrectly classified as independent contractors, or more people feel that is fair. But it is a topic of debate, one of many topics in regards to UFC fighters in terms of, is this a fair arrangement or is this the UFC taking advantage of fighters? Now, let me start by saying I don't necessarily know the correct answer, but what I'm going to talk about today is one more instance of Ariel taking a stand on a particular issue, defending the fighters, which I have no problem with, which of course, in theory, is something valiant to do, something that I think we can admire from afar. But again, it's an instance where he's taken the opportunity to defend the fighters to do what? To again attack the UFC. And this always leaves me wondering, is he sincere in his defense of the fighters? Does he actually know what he's talking about? And is he actually speaking with knowledge on his side? Or is he using this as another avenue to attack the UFC, a company and a brand, and that he has had problems with? This is something that he has been accused of many, many times, taking advantage of these opportunities to throw shade at the UFC if and when possible because of his checkered past with the UFC. And again, I don't begrudge him for this. I think it's understandable that he feels a certain way about the UFC given everything that's happened to him. But anyways, I want to talk about it. And the reason why is because Ariel is looked at as an authority in this sport in regards to mixed martial arts. He's an expert in so many ways. But I take issue when he uses his platform and his perceived expertise to talk unintelligently about this issue. Now, I don't know if he's right. I don't know if he's wrong in this stance. And let me state that clearly. The person to ask on this topic would be an employment attorney that specializes in employment law, specifically in Nevada and specifically with large companies like the UFC, probably sports management companies or sport organizations, etc. Now, I will say I am an attorney, but I'm a patent attorney. I used to be a patent attorney. Let me put it like that. I left that role back in 2013. I haven't practiced law since for the last 12 years. I started a business in 2013, but I will say I do have some legal background. Went to law school, practiced law for 4 years. So I'm going to try to do my best to speak about this distinction. I'm going to actually go through a little bit of the 6-prong test in terms of determining the distinction, whether or not somebody should be classified as an employee or an independent contractor. And again, remember, law is nuanced. We're not going to make an emotional argument here. We're going to go through the different criteria, and the things are not black and white. Law is treated as a subjective matter to allow for people to weigh different factors and then make a reasonable determination at the end, whether it's a judge, whether it is some other governing body, etc. So we have to we're not going to come away with a definitive answer, but I want to be fair and balanced as I look through the information as to whether or not this classification is correct or incorrect. Now, let me start with Ariel's clip and Ariel's take, and we're going to jump through and pause at certain points where I'm going to chime in and talk about where I feel he's being fair and where I feel he's, again, being unfair with this criticism and appealing to an emotional argument, which I don't think has a place here. It's almost it feels almost manipulative in some of the ways that he tries to position his argument. So we're going to start off this clip, and I'm going to chime in when need be.
Yeah.
In other sports, there's collective bargaining.
Yep.
They all negotiate. All right, how many times we're going to get tested, when we're going to get tested.
So right now he's talking about drug testing with this new organization, how frequently it should be done, and I guess he's comparing it to other organizations. Look, I don't know about the collective bargaining in terms of the frequency of the test and what makes sense, but this is anyways what he's talking about, and I guess he's comparing it to like the NFL and the NBA, etc.
Just They just sprung this upon them. And again, the fighters just sat back and said, okay, yeah, sure. 365. Yeah. You need to tell us where you are. If you don't tell us where you are 3 times, you'll get dinged. This is not how independent contractors are treated. I've given this example.
So this is where now he's bringing up the independent contractor status as an argument to say, hey, they shouldn't be tested this much, or they should have some say as to when they're tested, or when they have to notify people of their position and whereabouts, and when they'll be available to test, etc.
Example 1,000 times. If I call a plumber to my house, I can't tell him what to wear, and I can't tell him where to be the next day, and I can't ask him to tell me where he's going on the weekend. But fighters have to do that.
Now, this is the first time where I feel he's being really unfair. And I know you can't put every type of independent contractor in the same bucket. You can't compare a UFC athlete to a plumber when, let's say you're hiring a plumber once a year, once every 2 years, once every 3 years, once every 4 years, however, whenever it's necessary. They will come for a short period of time to take care of a particular issue, and they're going to be paid a very, very, very small fraction in that one job of their annual salary. For a UFC employee, they're coming 2 times a year, 3 times a year, but they're paying these large sums of money. Now, again, I don't know if that justifies the independent contractor status, but again, to me, it's an intellectually dishonest position to say, hey, I'm going to compare it to a plumber with a completely different structure and saying, hey, I would never tell him what to wear and things like that. Yeah, because that would obviously, we know that would be ridiculous when you're literally one tiny percentage or less, a half a percentage or 0.1% of that gentleman or woman, whoever the plumber is, of their annual income. So it's like this analogy that you're feeling so proud of in terms of saying like, yeah, you shouldn't do this to UFC fighters. It just doesn't make sense. And this is part of the test. It's a very nuanced test. I'm going to get to the 6-prong test in a minute from the Department of Labor, which talks about how to classify people, whether should be in the employee bucket or the independent contractor bucket.
And if not, they get penalized. And meanwhile, any UFC employee, this is the greatest irony, a UFC employee, meaning someone that works in the office, on the road, whatever, production, doesn't have to do that. But the fighter who is, very much labeled as an independent contractor, they have to do it. Now I understand.
There's obvious reasons. I think he's about to say, I understand why. That, again, it's a very unfair and to me intellectually dishonest argument to make, because there's reasons why. Yeah, of course, it's not necessary for the other employees, but for these guys, there's reasons why it's done the way it's done. It's so they can safeguard against manipulation of the testing. If you can say, hey, we're allowed to take a vacation. Okay, so I'm going to go travel for a week, and then they might use that time to detox or remove these materials from their body, or maybe take the materials, take the PEDs or whatever, because they know there's going to be a period where they can't be tested because they've been removed from the testing pool, I guess, temporarily. Like, there's obvious reasons why that is. So again, it's such an unfair thing to compare it to, whether it's an employer and an independent contractor, to somebody else in the UFC organization, where this type of testing and these types of protocols are clearly not necessary whatsoever.
And why they want them to do it, in the sense that, hey, they're the ones punching each other, but it's crazy that they don't collectively bargain this. And of course, someone will listen to this and say like, oh, you're being a hater. No. Would you want to do that? Would you sign up for this? If your job told you need to tell us where you are 24/7, 365, and if you don't tell us 3 times and you don't log on to the app and give us your address and give us your whereabouts, and we want to come to your house to drug test you at 6 a.m, would you be happy with that?
It's just like these types of arguments, they really bother me, because I feel like he's smart enough to know that this is just a ridiculous argument. Okay, yeah. Would I also sign up to be a fighter and get punched in the face? No. Would you want to do that, Ariel? No, you wouldn't. But I'm not going to, that's not an argument saying that there shouldn't be fighters, or there shouldn't be a UFC, or there shouldn't be mixed martial arts. So it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, maybe you wouldn't want to sign up to every element, but it's not a fair shake. And if you're really trying to tell the story from an unbiased perspective, which I think you pride yourself on, why tell it in this way that is just, it's just completely unfair in my opinion, to position it that way. That's an emotional argument. Would you want to do this? No, you wouldn't. Then they shouldn't have to do that either. But it's a different thing. They're signing up for something completely different. They're signing up for the highs and the lows. And once again, why is the system that way? It's so that it makes it, and I'm no expert in the drug testing system, but I'm just using my common sense and my brain, that it makes it more difficult to game the system and to work around it and to manipulate it and to actually still take PEDs while passing the test, etc. So we know what's going on. Okay, so this is the gist of it. This is his whole plea, impassioned plea to say, hey, this is unfair that you're characterizing them as independent contractors using, I guess, an analogy that he said he's brought up many times, which is a totally unfair analogy. And I'm going to show you why right now. We're going to go through the determination from the Department of Labor. And once again, I'll mention, as I want to make it clear, it's not as though the same standard is applied everywhere throughout the U.S. There's different standards from state to state. Once again, I'll stay for a second time, while I'm an attorney, this is not my area of expertise whatsoever, but I've just tried to do my best with a little bit of cursory research today to understand this. The best way to do this would be to have an employment attorney on. Maybe we'll do that at some point in the future. I'd love to have Ariel talk to a national employment attorney. And by the way, he may come out and say this is absolutely a mischaracterization. But one thing I'll say on this front, me as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, I do know, at least for example, in the state of California, if you are mischaracterizing employees as independent contractors, you can face penalties. It's not about a civil suit from the fighters or from those employees or independent contractors that have been classified incorrectly, but you can get fined directly a certain amount, a large amount per employee or independent contractor that you have classified incorrectly. So with the stable of fighters, I imagine there could be some pretty harsh and pretty severe consequences if the UFC has indeed classified them incorrectly. My assumption is that it's probably a fine line, and it's probably close enough where it's okay, because otherwise, again, this part's pure speculation, but I would again assume that somebody would have talked to him, something would have happened at this point. I don't know, unless they have some political connections, but I just want to say that off the cuff. Now, let's talk about the key factors. These are the true key factors for determining and distinguishing between employees and independent contractors. So 1, opportunity for profit or loss. This factor considers whether the worker's economic success or failure depends on their managerial skills, initiative, or business acumen. Number 2, investments. This rule considers the worker's investments in capital or entrepreneurial assets and how they compare to the employer's investments. 3, permanency of residency. This factor examines the duration and exclusivity. So this is an interesting point that I think would definitely weigh in favor of them being considered employees. It doesn't say here, but the implication is, as the exclusivity or the inability to work for other positions or other companies increases, that would make it more likely to be an employee-employer relationship, because they're basically now forced into a position where they're only working for you. An argument against that is that a lot of fighters, the majority of fighters, they're free to pursue other business ventures. They're free to create content, create podcasts, etc., none of which the UFC has any claim to any of that revenue or any of that profit, etc., in those independent ventures, right? We have Conor McGregor with his whiskey brand. We have so many other, Dustin Poirier with his hot sauce. Those are all their own properties, their own assets, their own ventures. Number 4, nature and degree of control. The Department of Labor assesses the employer's control over the worker's work, including scheduling, supervision, and pricing. So you could say, obviously, for the 1, 2, or 3 fights these fighters take per year, yes, of course, the employer has, in this case, the UFC has control during that time in the cage, the scheduling and how much they're getting paid, etc. And that's a negotiation that they're going to have with the UFC, the payment. But outside of that, think about the rest of the year. I imagine that would go in favor of being an independent contractor. You're training at your gym on your own schedule, on your own time. You're choosing when to be there, how hard to train, how light to train, how much to pay your coaches, etc. So you could see the factors going back and forth. And again, I'm not saying that this is definitive one side or the other, but I'm just trying to talk it through to give you guys some context of how this all works together. Number 5, integral part of the business. This factor considers whether the work performed by the worker is critical, necessary, or central to the employer's principal business. Well, of course, the UFC fighters, it is essential, it's critical, it is the entire business. And then skill and initiative. This rule considers the amount of skill, judgment, and initiative required for the work and whether the worker needs to exercise these qualities to be successful. I wanted to show one other little tidbit talking about the variations from state to state, and in Nevada in particular. So right here, it says Nevada's statutory presumption. Nevada's law establishes a presumption of independent contractor status if certain conditions are met, such as having an EIN or SSN, filing a tax return for a business, or being contracted to hold specific licenses or insurance. And the common law test, some states, including Nevada, utilize the common law test, which focuses on whether the employer has the right to control the manner and result of the work. Now, obviously, if you're unfamiliar with legalese and trying to understand legal language, there's a lot of room for interpretation, and that's done in a lot of times with some intention, so that there is some room for interpretation and some room for a judge or whoever the governing body is to weigh the different elements and to come to some conclusion, as facts are going to vary from one situation to the next, to the next, to the next. It's never going to be a one size fits all. So we have to have some subjectivity in there and some room for consideration, deliberation, etc. But coming back to this, the right to control the manner and result of the work, that could be interpreted a lot of different ways. But again, once they get in there and they do their thing, it's the coaches that are influencing the way the fighter fights. The fight has autonomy over how he wants to fight. So we could see that there's arguments, I think, on both sides. And a much healthier discussion about this would not be, boom, I'm going to defend the fighters and they need more benefits. They need more. Like, it'd be great. I hope everybody gets paid more. I think that'd be fantastic. And I'm obviously, I want to advocate for the fighters as well, but within reason. And again, it's a partnership. It's not an adversarial relationship. As the UFC grows, the fighters are going to make more money. That's already been happening over the last 30 years. And we got to remember that nobody was making anywhere close to this back in the 90s. Not even close. They would be blown away if they knew that they could make $500,000, $1 million, multi-millions, like some of the UFC superstars. So we have to remember, it's not as though as the UFC has grown to this multi-billion-dollar company, they're hoarding everything. They have been raising rates and payments and fight purses, etc. Has it all been perfect? I don't know. And I am not qualified, I think, to speak on all of the nuances of the business and fighter pay, etc. One day, I'd love to do a deep dive with the right expertise with me, somebody who can do a great economic analysis. But until that day comes, I will do my best to try and be reasonable and try to be objective within the best of my abilities. And that's that. So that's it. That's what I want to talk about. You guys let me know if you agree. Am I being too harsh on Ariel, or do you agree that he's once again coming at this with a bit of an unfair perspective? But more importantly, I think he's making these impassioned, emotional arguments with not a lot of facts and not a lot of proper understanding, almost being willfully ignorant, and terrible analogies. The Plumber analogy has got to go. He said he's used that for a long time. Dude, it's just such an oversimplification, and there's so many nuances and shades of that type of work compared to being a fighter that just are a complete mismatch. It's a terrible analogy. We got to get rid of this. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you guys so much for joining. I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.